some
Yes.
sort of deed restriction.
Correct.
Doesn't that, from a process perspective, it would seem to me require, which I don't know if that's kind of a roundabout way of saying what he's saying here in this order, but that, doesn't that ultimately require our approval to do that? Because we are authorizing X, we're now authorizing X plus Y. I mean, X plus Y happened. There's a deed restriction, a modification to our authorization that we've given for the sale of this property, because we're now selling it with new restrictions, not part of our initial authorization. Now, as opposed to, that's kind of an elaborate way. It just seems like a lot of this could be swept in as part of the regular council approving of real estate sales transactions process, as opposed to, some new policy. It just would be, you're voting on X counselors with X various conditions and requirements, such as the price, the different parameters. It would seem to me that this would have to be something we would okay.
Well, in a world of perfect information, it could run that way. The chronology of it is when the council approves the transfer of the property to the redevelopment authority. I'm going to guess to say it was around in October of 13.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not, but let's
just say for the sake of argument.
Approximately. The call to action is just resolve the problem and get it developed. We
Right.
don't even know at that point what's in there.
Right.
It could have been a nuclear waste dump.
Yep.
It wasn't going to be one.
But we know what you mean, yeah.
So we don't get the estimate until late 15, right, when we develop the specs. We don't run into the problem that there is even more than that than up to 2 months ago, right? So the call to action isn't initially clean it up to perfection. It's resolve the problem. I wouldn't have even known if it was possible to clean up.
So recognizing that you don't know it in advance. Now, let me just back up. When this transaction that the city council voted on was to authorize a sale of the property to Aegis at some point, or we sold the property to HRA?
The council has taken 2 votes related to this project. In 2013, it voted to transfer the property to the redevelopment authority.
Okay.
And then earlier this year, right?
Was the tax
Everything melts together,
tax
yes.
deal?
It was the special tax assessment on the property, because without the tax incentive, the deal wouldn't have happened. Those were the 2 votes.
So, and once we transfer the property to the HRA, to you to now sell it to a third party no longer requires our approval, correct? Once we've transferred it to the HRA? Okay.
It doesn't require approval. The issue with these properties is this is the bottom of the barrel, right? This is the most complex properties that the HRA has taken, because otherwise we wouldn't need an HRA. So they're highly complex projects or negotiations, and so you need to put stuff together.
Sure.
The odds of not having to come before the council for some part of it is low.
Right, but I'm just thinking of it, so I sort of answered my own question, because why I'm going through that is, if we sold the property to you without any restrictions on it, based on the information that we have, the second transaction, which is HRA to Aegis, I'm just assuming you're selling this property to them.
Right.
That's a transaction between the two of you and doesn't require our approval. So therefore, wouldn't need that second authorization. What I would be concerned about would be council to any other entity selling it with X authorization, and then post that, there's a new change to it that's coming from us to them. See, then I would say our authorization needed to include the AUL. But where here you have council to HRA, if HRA sells it to them with the AUL, that's a different matter. But, so then the question is, who is policing which I think I'm hearing from Counselor Sullivan, who is policing these determinations to put these restrictions on the property? Like, obviously, there's a cost benefit. I mean, all of this boils down to cost benefit analysis at some point, right? That you say, spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands more or agree to an AUL. If we can get DEP to agree to an AUL. And so this is decided by the board of the HRA, makes this vote, right?
The HRA board, as the director of the HRA, ultimately can make that determination. But I think we have a difference of perception as to an AUL is not a restriction that we place on it. It's an allowance that the DP gives us. When the site comes to our hands, it's completely restricted.
No, I
We're not
understand.
restricting it any further.
I understand that, but one could argue that the alternative, there are alternatives to you, right? Full remediation of the site or agree to the AUL status, right? This is an alternative, this is an option you have. Now, and one is making some affirmative decision one way or the other based on the cost and the benefit of these two choices, right? So in that regard, it is optional to you because you could, DEP could argue you could go the other direction as well, clean it up in totality, and when you won't be subject to our rules on AUL.
That's right. An AOL is not an automatic thing that you get. You know, they always want you to clean it up completely.
Right.
And so do we. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
that's why it was so complex of that graph that you saw, because we were trying to clean it up completely. An AOL is pursued where it is I mean, sometimes it's just laughable the amount of money that you would need. You could never get this.
Yeah.
It's not even a close calculation.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to, I guess, highlight some parts of that conversation that Councilor Jordan and Marcos just had. First of all, when the city council gave the property to the HRA, it was a complete brownfield.
Yes.
So
Yep.
they could market it to a company as a brownfield.
Yep,
And then it would be up to that company to clean it up to whatever standards they wanted to. But in this case, part of the negotiation was that the city was going to take some action to clean it up to a certain point. And the problem just seemed bigger, was realized to be bigger than it was when we first got on board. So there's an AUL that the DEP placed on that 200 by 50 foot area. So I think it's just, it's important to note that when HRA received it, it was completely a Brownfields site that you can do anything on, and this was just a negotiating point. It wasn't something that the city had to do. They could have sold it as a brownfield, and the buyer could have cleaned it up, but instead we took a different route. And I just want to highlight that we're not putting the AUL on, that the DEP is the one that is creating the use limitation so that we can move forward with using that site without having to clean it up to 100%. So that's it. I just wanted to highlight it for the board here.
Counselor McGivern?
Thank you, Councilor Bacon. Marcus, you've done a good job of explaining the Parson Paper site, and I accept I think we all accept the answers, and Councilor Jordan pointed out some important things that, when the redevelopment authority takes over property, when HEDIC takes over property, it's their responsibility in terms of determination of what's going to happen to the site, and somewhat their responsibility, and along with that, the liability of certain sites. I think the transparency, though, is it's important that the city council knows this, even though it's relinquished, the city council's relinquished their responsibility over the property itself. In the future, I think Councilor Sullivan's language should be case by case in terms of if we know it's a Brownsville site, we should say yes, to the redevelopment authority or yes to HEDIC. But if we're not going to get a full cleanup of the property of the Brownsville site, that there should be either some type of approval or some type of recognition of this back, to the city council itself. Now, this doesn't change what I just said, but I do have to ask you a question. Has the HRA accepted the deed of Parsons?
Yes.
I'm glad you said yes.
Oh, right.
Thank you.
We recorded it, I think it was earlier this year, if not end of 15. We have to have our own, by we, I am now talking about the redevelopment authority. The redevelopment authority had to have its own insurance over the process and not have the city liable in case anything happened with the project.
I asked that because of the issue that recently has come to the city council of how long it takes for the deed to be recorded and accepted. And this is an example of an issue that might come up that would be of our concern if the deed hasn't been recorded.
And if I can address the issue of, ultimately, it's your decision, of course. I would advise, though, that making another process, if we failed at any point in informing the council, then I'll take full responsibility for that. But I will advise that creating another layer of approval for something that, in this case, I can at least say that had we had to go through a city council approval process for an AUL, it would have been detrimental to the project. We would not have met the project's goals. It would have stopped us in our tracks. So I hope there's some consideration given to that. This is not the kind of surgical decision where it's like, are we, does $10 matter or not? We're talking in the order of magnitude of $500,000, $1 million or more of cleanup. So the decision is actually not that hard when you get to a level of contamination that you either know that you can tackle it or you know that it would be an absurd proposition. But if the expectation is that we should have communicated that, I'll take responsibility.
No, and I wasn't chastising you or the department. I think in the future it would help to clear up any confusion. And again, I do accept the way Parsons was handled. We've had some conversations, and I think it's important. And I think your answers tonight brings better insight to the entire process, but better insight to what happened at Parsons. Thank you.
So, Vargos, I guess this is the only comment I would make. If the city had turned the property over to the redevelopment authority and we knew that the redevelopment authority had recorded the deed, then from my perspective, the city council has nothing further to do with it. But the way that we're handling these properties is we think we're taking an action to sell the property for $1 to another entity that will then have legal responsibility for it. But it's sort of a not really, because if they didn't record the deed, they really don't. And I think it's creating a gray area. And I mean, this is just a perception that I'm getting because this order was filed, and I'm gonna guess there was only one person on the city council who even knew anything about any of this. Do you know what I mean? So it just seems like if there was a communication that said, in the case where the city council was using taxpayers' money to support a project, that the communication, what do I want to say? Just an early notification, I think would have gone a long way to probably saving you even having this discussion, perhaps. To your earlier comment, and
I'll accept that.
no, but I mean, but I just think that then the question that might get asked is already answered. That's all. Okay. Because of especially the deed things.
Sure. Yeah.
So we're not really sure because the 5 we just transferred are really still ours in a sense, right?
Gotcha.
All right. Thank you. Counselor Sullivan.
Well, it's not just that. We just put another one through where it's going to have a reverter clause. So it goes, we expected what was presented to us was a clean project, that we were going to have a clean piece of property. Something went wrong. That's not going to happen. Now the redevelopment authority can go ahead and put an AUL on this. Now, not the case in Parsons, but this is another reason anybody that, any planning board, any city department that wants to do this, on other pieces of property, there's a reverter clause that could come back to us. Now, in that meantime, in that 2 years, without it going before us, it could come back to us with an AUL.
Well, maybe somebody can help us out clarifying that, because my understanding is that as soon as the redevelopment authority is going to take an action with the property, they're going to record the deed, so that subsequent to something being done with the property, it's theirs. It's not gonna come back to us with the. Right. Once, right, but see, we put a reverter in that we're giving it to the HRA, but if they don't do anything with it in what, 2 years,
If they don't record
it's
the deed
coming
in
back
2
to
years,
us.
We take it back.
But if they're taking an action on the property, then they have to record the deed in order to take the action. So I'm just trying to clarify, I don't think we could end up in the situation Counselor Sullivan is concerned about. But can we suspend rules and ask Kara to
Suspend
weigh
rules.
in? Second. All in favor? Aye. Kara, could you just help us out on this point? Because to me, when we're in limbo and the deed is not recorded, it's still the city's property. But once the HRA takes an action with the property, they have to record the deed. So that then, when the project moves forward and they find this example, let's say, asbestos, then that's gonna be between the HRA and the property owner. The city is no longer going to be the owner, because they would have had to
Right.
record the deed.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot
True.
of things being talked about. There's some specifics because of certain projects. There's generalities. It's hard to answer because obviously every case is going to be unique. I mean, right now, putting aside Parsons, the properties you just approved to transfer to the HRA,
Right.
you said, I mean, there is no reverter. You said that if they're city-owned, they're going to be city-owned until we record a deed that says the city of Holyoke transfers it to the HRA. If that does not happen within 2 years,
Yes,
the HRA or whoever has to come back for further approval.
right, so it's not really a revert.
So they will still be in the name of the city of Holyoke. And if in that interim, or I mean, there's a few ways that can go. I mean, while it's city-owned, if the mayor decides the city wants to sell the property, that would have to come to the city council for approval. So I don't know if the only other point I would make to this discussion as far as the AULs is that I think it's pretty clear that the mayor, as the chief executive, has the authority to sign this type of contract. And the DEP guidance makes it clear that when it's a municipality, it's the mayor that signs it, subject to a provision of the charter, which I think our charter gives the authority to the mayor. So I'm not sure that an ordinance can change that process. I did some research today and looked, and there's maybe a half dozen AULs that the city has recorded. They've all been signed by the mayor, and there's one down at the DPW facility. So, and again, speaking in generalities versus specifics, it's not always going to be done in connection with a sale of a property. Marcos referred to the Magnet Middle School. You know, it might be done in connection with the city. If City Hall burned down and we had to clean it up, it might be done in connection with that. He's gonna.
Actually, the Suffolk Street Garage has an AUL because when they were fixing it, they found, it was some hydrocarbons that had to be dealt with. And so it was either chase it all the way, or you could resolve enough of it where it's still going to be a parking. The city just bonded for it, and Bill took care of
Didn't
it.
change anything.
Right. Well,
In
you know, there were
terms
some
of
pipes
use.
there to get the volatile components out, and there was some cleanup, yes. But you know, if
But
you
at the
dig
end of
out
the
some
day, it
dirt,
didn't
don't eat
change
off of
the
it.
use, it didn't change the project.
Correct.
And just one last point, I mean, to the order itself, I think the only aspect that you could even consider would be city council approval of the city granting an AUL. The HRA clearly by statute has the authority to do this when they own property. HEDIC clearly has the authority to do this. The gas and electric has the authority under their own special legislation. So I think if you were to consider any type of ordinance, it's only going to be for city-owned property that it's, you know, the mayor granting this to the DEP and recording it against city property, and you know, without having looked all again through the charter, but typically that is an executive power vested in the mayor, just as the mayor has the authority, you know, to sign the deed, and so that's my.
Thanks. Counselor Jordan?
Kara, in terms of thinking about the ordinance, and I agree with everything you said, I would just say, maybe what we want to consider is that if we were going to create an ordinance, something very brief that says any person who wishes to purchase property from the city would have to disclose, or the city would have to, somebody, or either the purchaser or the city itself, the mayor, I guess, would have to disclose to the city council that there will be sought an AUL as part of the transaction, that there will ultimately be a deed restriction, that there's some sort of disclosure requirement. I mean, that seems to me, because otherwise, unless somebody asks that question, we don't know what HRA would ultimately do. And again, you can only really base it to say, like in this case, it would have been, no, we have no intent to do this. This just became a later development as this already, but I agree with the point. Once we transfer it to HRA, it's HRA's headache. It doesn't involve us anymore. So my point is, but had you said all along, say you had that cost benefit analysis already done, and your intent was going in as a UAL all from the get-go, that's an important disclosable fact that we should know about, because then at least we can consider this cost benefit analysis on our own, right? You could present, it would be a requirement that you present us this information, and then we could say, well, for $1 million more, it's not worth it. 10,000 more, maybe it is worth it. And we feel that you shouldn't do this, but you should do this. And that would be something that we would weigh as part of our process of whether or not we okay the sale. So maybe we create a disclosure requirement on these.
For city-owned, you're saying?
And we can do
Well,
that.
only
if
for
we-
city-owned, because, I mean, we only care about city-owned because that's the only properties that come before us.
And just keep in mind too, we may not know at the time the council approves the sale because.
Well, that's my point there. I think it's reasonable expectation or some language
Right.
like that. We're not expecting you to have crystal balls, right?
Because just any city-owned property, the council's going to approve the sale and authorize the mayor to effectuate that sale. That's gonna be a purchase and sale agreement that's gonna give a buyer a due diligence period when, you can pick any vacant lot out there, they might find who knows what. And because the city during that time is still the owner, if that comes into play, it's gonna be could be the city most likely that
We
grants
don't
that,
always
so.
request the purchase and sale agreements in advance, though. We could ask for draft P&Ls.
We have a form purchase and sale agreement that's been the same we've used for every
Yeah,
but it's that something might come up during
Oh, yeah,
that
also.
time period and the council's already authorized the sale and authorized the mayor to effectuate that sale. So a disclosure is certainly if we know about it. I'm just giving you the caveat that in many cases, like with Parsons, you're probably not going to know about it until you actually do some digging,
Was that a
literally and figuratively.
No, I'm all set.
Oh, you're
I
all
mean,
set?
if we're gonna do it for city-owned property, but after we transfer the property, what
Right.
can we do? It's already transferred,
Right.
so, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Lisi?
Yeah, and I just wanted to reiterate, it's not like the city is putting the AUL on the property. It's the DEP's purview. They are granting us the AUL. It's not like we're putting the restrictions on ourselves. We're saying we're going to clean it up to this, certain amount, this certain level, and that triggers the AUL by the DEP. It's not like we take it on or we say we want the AUL. It's a granting of use by the DEP.
Right? That's,
Counselor Sullivan?
we have to apply. We have to say, we want it. We want it. We want an AUL on that property. We have to, DEP just doesn't come down and say, hey, let's give you one of these,
But the AUL is something that is granting us the ability to use that property in the condition that it's in. It's not like the city saying we want to
We
restrict
could
our
have had
uses.
it, that's correct, but we could have what could have been presented to us was that there's a change in what we had agreed to, what we thought we were voting on, what was presented to us, and that didn't happen. All right? The decision we could have made was we have to spend another $500,000 cleaning that site up. Or that we could have an AUL. We didn't get an opportunity to make that decision.
But the point
Councilor
here,
Lopez?
Mr. Sullivan, is that the property was already
Chair, please.
transferred to them, so we don't have any control. I
Right.
mean, it's, I understand what you're saying.
We got the deal
But
that
I
we signed
mean,
up for.
It's already transferred, it's already,
Right.
it's out our hands, so there's not much we can do.
Right. If I can, I think there's two tracks here. There's the track we can do something about, which is property owned by the city of Holyoke. And there's the track that is out of our hands once we've transferred the property to the other bodies, be it the redevelopment authority, HEDIC, or the HG&E, because they operate under their own unique set of rules and powers. So in those cases, once we've transferred it and they've recorded the deed, we're out of that loop. On the point of disclosure and a revision of the original deal, I think that's where there is an opportunity, if the committee wishes to pursue it, to talk about a disclosure requirement, if the plan and the conditions of the sale are that it will be a clean site, and then later on, it's discovered that it won't be able to be a clean site, because at that point, if I'm buying that property and I think I can make it clean and do anything I want with it, I'm gonna pay one pot of money. And if I dig a hole and I find out, ooh, I can only do one or two things, then I'm gonna be coming back to make a new deal. In those cases, I can see the argument for coming back to the city council, because then it's no longer the deal that the council approved, right? It's a new deal. It could be half the money, it could be a tenth of the money, theoretically, right? In that, an example like that?
Trying to think through, so you're presenting the hypothetical that if the city council approves a sale
Of land
at 100
X.
units of whatever, or land X, and then there's an AUL placed on it, instead of it being completely cleaned, that would actually probably be a net gain to the city, because the AUL, you only pursue an AUL, and the council was right, you actually have to technically apply for it. You're asking the DEP for relief. You're saying it's gonna cost me way too
Right.
much to clean it
I'm only
up.
saying I think it would be a concern of the city council if it drastically changed the price and the value of the deal. It couldn't change the
We
price?
couldn't change the price, right.
Okay, so in that case, then, if that's not a possibility within what we're discussing, then that's a good point of clarification for me. So,
If there's anything I can leave you with, is that AULs are not a bad thing, that if it even comes back to you, I think we ran through the scenarios of whether it
Yes,
could come back, I don't want to
I'm clear
reiterate
on that.
that, but even if it did, you still have something that is vastly superior than what you ended up with.
right,
It's
right, and she just clarified on the money point that couldn't change anyway, so. I think we've kind
I
of,
think we,
Yes and no.
Counselor Jordan?
What has happened is all these scenarios are complicated now by the use of the HRA. In the olden days, or the not too olden days, before we had an HRA, everything was city council to out the door. Okay? I'm ex-developer, somebody is the Marrero of those days, whether it was Jeff Hayden or Bob Bateman or whomever, and they were negotiating and cooking these deals together, right? So they would then present this and we would sell it, property for X dollars, all right? So in that instance, yes, if somebody said, oh, wow, I just found out now this property's worth 100,000 less, so I want less money, then of course that would have to come back to us, which is Kara's point, right? But what we're doing now is all of these properties are all going for $1 over to HRA. So price is never a consideration. The point is all these post-authorization transactions are occurring at the HRA level, not coming to us. Now, all this stuff in the olden days would come back to us and we would met it out here in council, all right? And so you would have this give and take. This is the point. So some of the, I mean, I have faith in what you're doing. Okay, that's not at issue here. The point is, some of these AULs potentially could put a limitation on a piece of valuable property to the community that some may be concerned that, wow, you know, here it's only a small parcel, this is a non-issue. But let's just say the extreme example. Say you said, you know, a 10-acre property downtown, no more could there ever be used for residential. But that maybe is against our community plan to have more residents living downtown, right? That's a pretty big decision. That probably shouldn't be left alone solely at the HRA level. That should be a policy decision of the elected officials. And so these are the two examples. Here you have something that I would concur totally with what you said. But on the other hand, we might say, the other end of the pendulum, maybe I don't want you to apply for the AUL to DEP. We would want to push more for remediation, that we would want to have a greater examination of that cost-benefit analysis because it's wider in scope. The point is, that all is happening now at the HRA level. Now, as far as us goes, that's kind of the deal we've bought into by having an HRA. So we as counselors need to understand we're somewhat putting a cloak of another layer here in the process. You're the middleman between us now and the future buyer. We never had that back in the olden days, but now we have. So we know this going in advance. So we have to be, 15 of us, have to be savvy enough to ask these type of questions. But for those that are less savvy, maybe we need to have a disclosure component which requires to say, if you know of these going into it, that's part of the deal when it's at council level, you tell us that. But if it's not, and it's not, you don't know it, this is something that happens post-transaction, then that's just part of having an HRA, and we need to accept that, and we move forward, so.
Thank you. So I would just like to comment that I think the time for the city council to be concerned about whether there may be an activity use limitation needed on a property is at the time that we're transferring it to whatever body we're transferring it to. And that if it is a 10-acre parcel and there is a concern relative to that, that we ask that question before we grant the transfer. And that we get it, that once we transfer it, it's gone. And that's that. I mean, that's my take on it. Councilor Lisi?
Yeah,
And then Councilor McGivern.
Just very briefly, I mean, number one, I think part of the reason why we created an HRA is to help expedite these sorts of processes so that they don't get gummed up by the city council. And that I really do trust that the HRA that's consisting of, community members and, department heads, city staff, are acting in the best interest of the city. So I think that they're working in accordance to the downtown vision plan that is their guiding document, and we all approve that document, and we're entrusting the HRA to move forward on implementing that plan through these types of sales and negotiations. And I think that we got to a place finally where it's like, if we know that there is going to be an AUL in the sale to the HRA, then perhaps that's the only time that it's appropriate to disclose it to us. Otherwise, it's really, to me, it's the HRA doing the most with the property so that it's back online. And I don't see the AUL really being a problem because we're getting the property back online with that restriction. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor McGivern?
I agree with what's being said. I think we're all on the same page, and there is one other precautionary mechanism that's already in place. In the case of HEDIC, each property transfer comes with its own economic development plan, which we approve prior to HEDIC taking on any property or taking on any development itself. The only exception of where there was multiple properties was when the city council and the mayor allowed HEDIC to take on the gas and electric properties that they acquired from the dam purchase and to help them market it, but that came with some very strict reverter language for the gas and electric. With the case of the HRA, it's a little different. There isn't an economic development plan for each property. There's a large urban renewal plan, which is part of where all these properties have to fit into. So the precautionary mechanism is if HEDIC were to change the economic development plan by the sale or doing anything with an AUL or anything of any nature, they would have to come back and modify the economic development plan. HRA just has to make sure the property they accept fits into the urban renewal plan. Otherwise, they would have to come back and either add to the urban renewal plan or amend it.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to, oh, Council Sullivan?
Counselor Sullivan?
I think if I heard this right a few minutes ago, that the city now has 6 AULs out there. Now, until just a few minutes ago, I thought that in the entire state, there was only several that the DEP was very, very, very reluctant to grant these at all. And so now we've got some departments, and this isn't redevelopment authority, this isn't HEDIC. Now we've got the DPW out there getting AULs on their own. I just find this whole thing troubling.
I make a motion that this item be tabled so we can further study and see what, if anything, we wanted to do with this.
Before I entertain a second on that, if I could just ask, if we could just get a communication on the AULs, where they are, what they're about, and then just, based on what I'm hearing about them, I don't really see where there's a public concern from a public safety point of view or whatever in this regard. I think it's good to know they exist if we have them, but Counselor Sullivan, as the maker of the order, if you could help us understand what the concern is. Is it just the knowing of them?
Well, you're taking city property and you're making the decision, number one, not to clean it up. So, you know, it's not going through the city council. Maybe it's the right decision, but it's being made, from what I'm hearing right here, by a department head and then just signed off by the mayor, I guess. It's not going before the city council. There's 6 of them out there now.
And so maybe it would be helpful if we're tabling this item, if we could get the list of the AULs and just sort of the process around it and what sort of the lines of authority are, if you will, and how the process happens. And then we can look at it and see if we would like to write in a thing where we formalize that we get a communication when such a thing as this happens, or we put in some kind of disclosure language. But that, I think it would be helpful for us to
Yeah,
have that. Oh, okay.
Okay, that would be better.
Oh, okay, all right. So then maybe we can just clarify it now, and the internal process is that when it comes to the attention, there's an issue with the property through our department, then that issue is addressed and it goes to the mayor, and the mayor, under his authority as a strong mayor form of government, addresses the issue within the deal? Would that be fair to say? Is the process with the city-owned property? I mean, everything doesn't come before the city council. A lot of things get dealt with in a department to the mayor.
Yes, I would agree with that through the city. But the part that, as part of the deal, this is not necessarily as part of a real estate transaction, right? And a contaminant can fall on a property at any point in time.
So are you saying you
ju-
might
just to
apply
cl-
for an AUL for any property at any time?
Yes. So
That
for
it
so
might
for
be
example.
discovered?
Yeah, so the example that the DPW, I don't know when that AUL was placed, but probably in the last 20 years, let's say.
Okay.
And Suffolk Street Garage is another. These weren't parts of a real estate transaction. It was just part of some sort of infrastructure project.
Okay,
Table it and think about it.
okay, so I think the issue is really disclosure
We have a
and
lot of other
notice.
items, so.
All right, so if we have a second,
Second table?
all in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take a motion on item 4.
Motion
Move
to take
item
up
4
item
from the
four.
table.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 4, filed by Counselor Sullivan, to amend Appendix B of the Wetlands Protection.
See, Marcos?
These are the sections 1, purpose, 2, applicability, and section 2, jurisdiction, to add language that would recognize that the canal system is not a part of the natural wetlands or waterways of the region and are not in the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. The canals are a mechanical component used in the service of the public as described in Section 8 exceptions. Okay, I see we have our Conservation Commission members with us. And Counselor Sullivan, I'll turn it over to you as the maker of the order, and while you're going over it, I'm going to distribute information made available to the committee.
Yep, well, what you've got in front of you here is, the first is Chapter 131, which, if you look at, this is the Wetlands Protection Act itself. If you look at page 4, I've highlighted down there for you, the riverfront area shall not include land now or formerly associated with historic mill complexes, including but not limited to the mill complexes in the cities of Holyoke, Taunton, Fitchburg, Haverhill, Methuen, and Medford. And it goes on from there. But
I'm sorry, Mike, what's the relevant section that we're looking at?
it's on page 4.
This one.
Oh, page
That is
4.
folder, this one?
At where?
No, this one.
No, I'm seeing section 40, it's a long statute. Where do you want me to,
He's
where do you want
I've
me to begin
highlighted,
reading?
I've highlighted on
okay.
page
It's
4
highlighted, the rubber.
Oh, okay.
at the bottom.
Okay.
But the entire act is there for your reading pleasure. Also, I've included a copy of 310 CMR, which governs us also. I'd call your attention to,
Riverfront areas, but that's different than wetlands.
I can't find the notes here.
Oh, subsection G?
Yes, in particular, so Mass General Law, or 310 CMR 10.58, it's section 2A1G, all right, however that reads, all right, which refers to human-made canals and canals diverted from rivers in Lowell and Holyoke. All right.
Do you
And-
want this copy? I don't need it. Sorry.
What, you know, what has happened here is we've got a section of the canal down abutting Canal Street and Water Street, directly across from 37 Appleton, which is a city-owned property that we're in the process of disposing of, and abutting on the other side, Holyoke Gas and Electric's Riverside Station and the new substation. The Conservation Commission, not the current one sitting here tonight, in the previous, went down there on the heels of Hurricane Irene and declared it an intermittent stream, which is a way of short-circuiting, I feel, the intent, the true intent of what the wetlands regulation is here, which clearly attempts to limit, you know, the restrictions placed on the canals of Holyoke, and it's mentioned several times. I've also included for you a copy of a appeals, Commonwealth of Mass appeals finding, where the Reading Conservation Commission, as well as the Mass DEP, had their determination of applicability vacated for exactly these reasons. So we've got, you know, an issue here, I think, of a well-meaning group of people, but far extending their jurisdiction, then it's causing a lot of problems, I feel, not only with the development in this particular instance with which I'm familiar, but it overlaps into all the development going along the canals. It overlaps into the job of HG&E maintaining them, And a lot of it, I feel, is just uncalled for.
So if you could specifically state or give us an example of a concern. I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm not getting it from sort of a practical point of view, what you mean.
All right. Well, the concerns are, number one in particular with the one event that triggered the entire thing, I feel, is this property through the efforts of the Conservation Commission has been declared an urban oasis. All right, a green spot.
Where's this?
This is between Water Street and Canal Street, directly across from 37 Appleton.
Urban oasis.
Urban oasis. So, and then on one section of it has already been filled in and was turned over to Hamden Papers for a parking lot. When you talk about, it's too late now because the cat's kind of out of the bag on this one. Now the city's stuck with the property. 5 years ago, we had a developer ready to do something with 37 Appleton. 37 Appleton is a huge building. I think it's almost 1 million square feet. It has 3 parking spots. Back when it was a Worthington pump, everybody came to work by bus or walked to work from their apartments in the flats. So HG&E had agreed to turn this property over to the developer. The developer spent well over $100,000 with Apex to do a study, prove that it could not support a standing, not even an intermittent stream, and all that was just thrown out the window. And I feel for no reason, this is one example of the jurisdiction having caused problems that shouldn't have existed, where we'd have a developed piece of property now.
So are you saying that one section of the canal was filled in and made into a parking lot, and another section next to it is what is protected?
Urban oasis, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So the history as I know it is this section of the canal could no longer be used by Hoyoke Water Power. It was about 80% filled in the course of the 1950s, 60s, 70s. I don't know when it stopped. As they'd cleaned the silt out of the canals, this was the dumping ground for the silt coming out of the canals. So eventually we don't do a lot of silt cleaning and maintenance on the canals anymore, and the stuff goes somewhere else. But so it's about 3/4 or more filled in already, and this is what it has become. If anybody goes down and tours it, it's nothing but there's some homeless people living in there, and it's a place for the local crackheads to hang out during the day. But it's far from anything you'd want your kids playing in. One section of it, we have another ordinance in, or another, not an ordinance in, another order in. It's the most disgusting pool of standing water that you ever see. It looks like pea soup down there.
Okay, well, maybe we could get some input from our conservation folks on this particular example.
Sure, yeah, so I'll keep it simple. I don't want to drag it out too much. I want to kind of start with unpacking the wetlands regulations a little bit, not going into too much detail, because you have your human beings, and I don't want to do that to you, right, on a Tuesday night.
We do have this copy, which I think
Yeah, so-
is it,
So those are,
and we have a 310 CMR.
yeah, so
Would those be the proper?
So what you have is you
Guiding
have the
documents?
act and then the regulations. The regulations are really thick.
Okay.
So what I will say is that, so in Holyoke there are a number of different categories of regulated resource area. You have bank, which is 10.54 of the CMR, BVW, land under water bodies, land subject to flooding, and riverfront, which is section 10.58. So the way it works is you can have multiple resource areas on a single parcel. You could have, a BVW, you could have floodplain, you could have riverfront area.
What was that one?
Yeah, the
Just
second
walk us
one.
through some of these acronyms.
Okay, so bank, that's an easy one. Bank, you have a stream.
Riverbank?
Riverbank, right?
Okay.
First observable break and slope is the
All right,
bank.
I got that one.
Bordering vegetated wetlands, that's BVW. So basically you have a river or a pond or something, and there's a little stream that goes off to the side, and you'll have a BVW that, in a perfect scenario, basically is just off of that. It's connected based upon Army Corps findings over the years that it's connected, and you can have a wetlands there.
Then riverfront.
Yeah, so after BVW, you'll have land underwater, right? It's the land underneath the water. The top
underneath.
of the water itself isn't regulated. It's the land under the water.
Underwater.
Land subject to flooding, which is the floodplain, but it's a very specific hydrogeological calculation of the floodplain. It's the flood elevation above the flood stage. So there's these different calculations where it's not just what you see on the map, it's the actual depth of the flood. So that's land subject to flooding. Bordering, which is bordering river or brook, and isolated, which is in some places that's a vernal pool, but in Holyoke there's a local jurisdiction which establishes what a vernal pool is. There's also section 10.58, which is riverfront, which I'll get into in a little bit. And just to kind of simplify things, my very first job when I was in high school, I was 14 years old, I was washing dishes, right? I got paid $5.50 an hour because that was the minimum wage at the time, So anybody's ever had a job, minimum wage is the absolute floor. You can never go below that, Your employer might want to go below that, but they cannot go below that. I remember when I got my first raise, I went to $6.50 an hour when I was 14 years old, and I felt like I was doing great. So, local ordinances kind of work that exact same way. You can be, you can do a little bit more, you can be more restrictive, but you can't be less restrictive. So say, for example, with notification to abutters, if you want, say the state law says you have to notify abutters 300 feet away from a property. You can say, well, we want to be super diligent and we want to notify abutters 600 feet away from the property. You can do that, but you can't say, well, you know what? We think 300 is too far. We're going to go 100, because that would be less restrictive than state law. So that's something to keep in mind as we have local ordinances which have local vernal pool categories and local intermittent stream categories. A lot of towns don't regulate intermittent streams if they don't have an ordinance. So keep that in mind. It gets super technical, and I don't want to keep it that way. So having said that, so section 10.58 is riverfront. Think about it as the Rivers Act. This was adopted in 1996. The rivers, just think about it as this category. The Rivers Act creates a 200-foot resource area around any perennial stream. So Broad Brook for Councilor Bacon, Tannery Brook, Connecticut River, obviously, portions of Green Brook potentially, portions of Day Brook potentially. So those are sort of the easy ones to think about. Those have a 200-foot resource area associated with them. Basically, that whole area, it's a riverfront. But what the legislature did do in 1996, 1997, when this was being adopted, was that section G that you have a copy of right there. It says that these towns, these places, Cape Cod, Lowell, and Holyoke, don't have riverfront in the canals. Specifically it states human-made canals, e.g. Cape Cod Canal, canals diverted from rivers in Lowell and Holyoke, and mosquito ditches associated with coastal rivers do not have riverfront, right? So I don't think anybody who's familiar with the regulations would say that there's a riverfront around the canals, right? There's no riverfront around the canals in Holyoke. So take that off the table. It doesn't exist. But what this language here does not do is doesn't get rid of bank. It doesn't get rid of land underwater. It doesn't get rid of flooding, but flooding isn't associated with the canal system. So yeah, you still have bank, potentially BVW, and land underwater affiliated with the canal system. since the Wetlands Protection Act was adopted, about 261 large-scale permits have been filed. A number of those have been filed in and around the canal system. Think of the MGH-PCC, think of the one you're just talking to, which is Aegis Energy. Those had delineations which called out specifically bank and land underwater associated with canal systems. Those permits were never appealed by any of the applicants. You know, those went through, they sailed through just fine. There were no hindrances or restrictions at all that resulted from the permitting process as a result of those regulations.
But what were they for and what were they about? I mean, in terms of.
MGH-PCC, that's the High Performance Computing Center.
No, but I mean, what was the concern or the purpose for what the permit was
Okay,
obtained
so
for?
I'll take that and I'll circle it and I'll put it in my back pocket, and just to kind of explain how things work. There's always an appeals process. So the thing that was established, the thing that was brought up earlier in reference to a parcel that was off of Canal Street and Water Street, there is an appeals process. If someone does not like a decision, they can appeal to DEP, or they can appeal to the Superior Court. If they don't like the local conservation commission's interpretation of state law, there's a form that goes with every single determination of applicability, and it says, don't like the decision, fill it out, send it to the DEP, and they will appeal the conservation commission's determination. If it's somebody who's not happy with the local conservation commission's interpretation of the local ordinance, that goes straight to Superior Court. The one that was referenced earlier was never appealed under either state or local jurisdiction. So the appeals process is there, it protects people's rights, and no appeal was ever filed for that. So, a court of competent jurisdiction has an opportunity to take that up. A court of competent jurisdiction did not take that up. So I think that's something to keep in mind when it comes to considering things that happened in the past. So,
Excuse me.
Well, but what we're trying to get an understanding of is, okay, so the counselor has filed an order relative to what the status of a particular area is.
yes.
And I get what you're saying, that under the current rules, ordinances, et cetera, that we have, that's the process, and if you don't like the answer, you can appeal it. I think the question being asked here is, should the rules that we have be the rules that we have?
Well, to answer that, go back to my very first job. My employer probably would like to pay me less than $5.50 an hour. However, there was a floor that was established by the Federal Minimum Wage Act. So in this case, think of it this way. State law sets the conditions. And this is why it's kind of really important. It's a case-by-case call that the Conservation Commission gets to make. So they understand it's really hard to draw a line on a map and say, this is where a wetland is, this is where a wetland is going to be forever in a town. And what you get as a result of that is you get 7 people who are charged with this quasi-judicial role of saying, this line on this piece of paper represents where the wetland is in the field. And oftentimes, it's the judgment call of those 7 individuals that can make it so much easier to have the local Conservation Commission do it than to have DEP making that call for you.
And I hear that and I get that, but I think what we're trying to look at here is, what is the state telling us we must do, and how does that compare to our local ordinances that we have on the books? Are our local ordinances having us do more than the state would require, or do our local ordinances match what the state requires? I think that is the simplest way I can put the question.
That's one question. Yep.
That's the large.
Do we have any local ordinances that are more restrictive than the state?
Yes.
That's what I'd like to
That affect
understand.
canals? Just
Arou-
keeping to the topic of
Right.
canals.
Around the canals, no, because
Okay. So you're just applying for the purposes of canals, limiting entire, because I mean, this is a wide breadth of a topic, limiting our discussion strictly to canals of Holyoke.
yes.
We have no local ordinance that's more restrictive than state law, and we're strictly, the Conservation Commission is applying its interpretation of state law as it relates to canals.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
So now it's policy so you said these 3 sections of the conservation laws, as you had defined them, bank, BVW, and land underwater, do apply to canals, apply to our canals.
Based upon past decisions.
Based upon past decisions. And so you guys are charged, the commission, with figuring its applicability as it relates to those decisions in the state law.
Correct.
Okay, so so could we move it back to the discussion, because I think we're on a fundamentally different underpinning here. Mike, you presented Riverbank. He's saying, you're right, Riverbank doesn't apply, but these other 3 environmental statutes do apply. Do you see where this is going?
Hang on a second. And the other question is, under the same rules, one chunk of the canal gets filled in, and another chunk of the canal can't be filled in. So what would be the distinguishing differences, I guess, in the
1972.
examples? Well,
Pre-Clean Water Act.
Yeah.
but, so I just think that's the other part of the question. Counselor Sullivan, did you want to clarify something?
Well, to me, it's clear that the state is trying to make a distinction that exempts the canals of these 5 cities from the Wetlands Protection Act.
No, from being defined as riverfronts.
From that one act, the Rivers Act.
Yes.
So
Okay.
that's right. And
So where, I fail to see the canals, what other piece of this legislation would put it in the jurisdiction of the local Conservation
Okay, so
Commission?
then maybe we can get the references on that.
Maybe you could give us examples,
In the regs, what?
if not today, another time, that you said you've relied on past decisions or past regulations to explain why these other 3
Yeah.
environmentals do apply to the
Even that
canals.
Reading court case that was referenced earlier makes the exact same case. So in that Reading court case, what the local commission did is they asserted riverfront jurisdiction over a man-made diversion in somebody's backyard. The appellate court, I don't know the name or the person who made the decision, but what they said is that riverfront was wrong, but the other categories still exist. Even in the court case that was presented as documentation, they made that exact same case. So just referring to what another court of competent jurisdiction has decided, I'm going to say that people have made the argument conversely, basically saying that you can have this jurisdiction when you don't have it. And the sort of opposite conclusion has been drawn that all these other categories still exist. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
they're kind of making
Yeah.
2 sides of the same argument with the same meeting in the middle.
There's what your point is, there's a whole fabric, there's a plenary of environmental laws in Massachusetts, right? There's a whole series of them.
I get it.
This segment does not apply.
Correct.
By statute. They carved it out by the legislature. But this over here, this whole plenary of other stuff still does apply. I think that's the point, Mike, is that the director's trying to say, you're right on riverfront, but don't let that fool you to believe like that's the only environmental law we have on the books. There's all this other stuff that does apply, so.
and it
And
does.
you might want to hear from the chairperson about how they approach development in and around the canals too, because they have a working internal policy that maybe he could fill you in on a little bit more.
Right, so we're not trying to stop development there, and I've had a chance to talk to Councilor Sullivan about this too, and
have, or
yeah,
have-
so
oh,
we've had
okay.
a chance to talk a bit about this, but you know, and it is complicated there, but the exemption that Councilor Sullivan is pointing out is clear. You know, it's a very clear exemption against riverfront, and so that does give us, you know, we do have room in along the canals, you know, to allow for projects to occur. As you know, Andrew pointed out, many projects that we have been able to permit in those areas. Now, there's still those other areas that have to be protected, and in that case, there was a small area that was a wetland area that was delineated in the area. So that did create a resource area that had to be protected. But it wasn't, but because there are no exemptions because there is no riverfront there, it allows us more room for guidance and for understanding and for development to occur in some cases. And I think that, you know, I wasn't on the commission when that particular project occurred, and we don't view the point that Andrew was, the reason he was asking me to state on this, we don't try to view the canals as pristine I think you said, an urban oasis. We try not to look at it that way. We view places there as potential opportunities, but we also, there are endangered species there in the canal. We have to consider that. There are wetlands there that are jurisdictional wetlands that we have to address. So, but we try to also look at what's proposed and only provide the protections that are needed in those conditions. So, I wasn't there when this particular project came before the commission, but I think we've generally been fair on these issues, and that's what I said to Councilor Sullivan when we talked, that we try to look at the particular circumstances in every case. And in this case, we're asking for an exemption that really isn't going to solve anything. The Holyoke Ordinance is not the issue here. It's the state protection of the canal, and the canals deserve protections, but we don't treat the canal as if it is a pristine. We don't treat it the same as we would treat the Connecticut River, for instance. But in that case, you also have the Connecticut River waterfront that is very close to where his property is as well. So there's compounding issues there.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Counselor Sullivan?
I've yet to hear under what venue or what section of this the Conservation Commission feels it does have venue. I've heard which ones they don't. Also, what I heard from the director is still just, I can't believe in a city where we're struggling for economic development to attract developers, here we have it once again, let them hire an attorney and go and fight us in Superior Court. I don't feel, the guy had already spent $100,000, right? And for him to have to go and fight it, hire an attorney when whether it's the City Conservation Commission or the director, it's easy to say that because it's going to be the city that takes on that expense. It's going to be our legal department that takes on that expense. They're not going to have to go out and spend a dime of their money, but we're telling developers to go out there that have already spent hundreds of well over 100,000 proven to this Conservation Commission that it could not support a intermittent stream. Threw that information out the window and it completely ignored it and say, go ahead and appeal it. It's our decision over something I don't feel they're proven they have any jurisdiction over in the first place.
Okay, and Counselor Sullivan, I take your point, and I think it's fair to say that I think it's a reasonable question to understand where the authority comes from under the other three arenas of the law that, Andrew, you have referenced, which I can't remember all the verbiage about. But I think it is a fair question to understand how the regulations inform the commission and how that authority is within the commission's purview. However, Counselor Sullivan, for purposes of this committee, I don't see where there's anything for us as the ordinance committee of the city to do for you because I don't see that there's an ordinance issue here. We are understanding that there is no city ordinance that is more restrictive than the state law. So it's really a question of understanding the state law and the regulations under the state law and how they apply to the commission. Unless there's a member of the committee that's seeing this differently than I am. However, I do think it's reasonable to understand the answer to your question on the three areas. I forget, what was it? Land under the water, the bordering, was that the other one? And then there was one other, the isolated water,
Land,
was that the other
land
one?
under the water
No, that one I said. Land under the water, bordering,
and banked.
and then was the other one isolated
BVW and.
water?
So in the canals in the past, you've had bank, land under water bodies and waterways.
Bodies and waterways.
So it's
BVW.
and BVW, and those are the three: bank, LUWW, and BVW. Just for the acronyms. So those are the three that have been found to be in place in the canals.
Maybe you could get us a full copy of that opinion, that the one that was referenced
Reading.
earlier.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. Yeah, Reading.
Yeah, so
So we can read that and
Sure.
educate ourselves more on the other
And then
components
we
of the
would-
statute.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting at. Can you also provide a copy of the letter that you sent to the company? I just want to read it and see if I can find out more
Oh,
information.
so this is from 2010, I believe. So
So it's,
so it was before my time, but I have the file, so I can get the
if
file.
you're
for you.
able, I mean, it's just that I think it will be a good idea for, especially for me, just to
Yeah.
learn a little bit more. And,
Right, because I want to entertain a motion to table this till we can get that other information.
Can
But,
I-
but
can I
at
add
the
some-
moment, based on what I'm hearing, I'm not seeing something for the committee to actually do.
Can I add one more point for just public record? So DEP appeals are free, so you don't have, so DEP work, they do all that work internally, and what they do, if you don't like the decision, is they say, what did the commission do in this case? Are they right? Are they wrong? And if the commission's off base, they'll overturn the decision. So that avenue is free. So it's not like it's an unreasonable expectation for somebody to, if they don't like a decision, to go the next step and get a second opinion. That happens frequently.
Right, but just to be clear, I mean, the purpose of our committee is not to evaluate or otherwise examine the function of other boards. I mean, we're just here to look at it. Is there something within the city ordinances that would speak to this or not, really? All
So-
right.
Motion the order's been complied with, unless we really want to table it. I think we could do this research, and then if
Well,
there is something, then we could refile something.
Counselor Sullivan, are you comfortable with that if the information is forthcoming and then you could see where you'd want to go with it? I mean, it's just simply, if our local ordinances are not more restrictive than the state, there's really nothing for us to modify.
Well,
And they-
yeah, I'd go along with that, with the caveat also that I want,
To understand
I
applicability.
want a clear understanding of where the authority of the Conservation Commission comes from regarding the canals. I'm still not seeing that here. I'm just
So-
not seeing
So
it.
that's what we're
So
asking him for
just to have on the
documentation to show
record-
you that.
Just to have on the record, Andrew has agreed to provide you with the references that show the authority in the 3 areas that we just clarified. And he has agreed to provide a copy of that case. So if that is provided to you and understanding that we can't really do anything otherwise, then I think the motion to say it's complied with is in order.
Fine.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, and thank you for providing all that information. It's complicated stuff, especially when we have so many layers. Oh, great,
Okay.
So I'll forward it to Counselor Bacon, and then you can disperse.
sure. Thank you very much.
Let's make sure we get a copy of that letter from 2010 also.
Oh, okay, from 2010, from the prior commission.
Right.
That was Alicia?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
I'd like to suspend the rules to take up 7, 8, and 9 off the table as a package for a brief update.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So item 7 is order that
This is all the 3 purchasing things.
the
procurement
purchasing
orders.
department in chapter 2 of the Code of Ordinances be reviewed and amended as necessary for consistency with the thresholds set by Mass General Laws, chapter 30B. Thank you all.
See ya.
8, filed by Counselor Bartley, that the City of Holyoke amend Chapter 30 of its Code of Ordinances to provide for the public procurement of outside legal counsel. Since Chapter 30B exempts procurement of legal services from public bid laws, this order would supersede state law and increase consumer protection. Bartley and Soto also filed similar orders. Item 9, Bartley ordered to strengthen procurement laws. The City of Holyoke will put police-ordered towing and any other public towing services out to bid on at least a biennial basis. Those items are before us. It was
Okay.
presented to the City Council. It was sent back to committee.
Yep, thank you.
Counselor Jordan.
Yes, so first of all, I want to take ownership of the fact that the council was not at a majority view at the last meeting, because I feel I should have done more legwork to explain to councilors, particularly those that aren't on this committee, plus Counselor McGivern, who's very faithful about attending these meetings. I think had I done that to explain what the ordinance is and the various nuances, I don't think we would have had the result that we would have had the other night. So I'm glad the council voted to reconsider, send it back to committee for further discussion. So in speaking to various counselors, numerous have said to me they're good as is. Now, I had one counselor say to me he's going to a couple minor edits, and I wanted to see if there was anything that anybody else felt was something that, an edit that would make them feel more comfortable about it. That doesn't, obviously, I mean, you get to a point where, maybe you're just against it because you're against it, and what you would be proposing is just fundamentally different than that. And for that, I probably can't do that. But I would really try, if there's certain things, either people could email me, we have one more meeting. I mean, my hope is to have a review of these at the next ordinance meeting, and then come back with a final product at some point in September, to have this out of committee again. So, if there are those who would like to make an amendment or a proposal, I want to be fair, I want to listen, I want to consider all those points, and I would love to have everybody's support of this ordinance. I think it's a tremendous ordinance. I think this committee's done a fantastic job. I think this committee's done a ton of work. I think the law department has done a ton of work. And I think we moved the ball a long, long way. And I think this is landmark legislation of this city council. I think this is exactly what we're here for, to fix things and modernize things and make these type of improvements. So on that note, if there's anything that I can do to work with individual counselors on certain fine points, then please, by all means, I want to do that.
Our city solicitor wishes to be heard on this matter.
Yeah, sure.
Under suspension of rules.
Thanks. I just wanted to give you, Councilor Jordan mentioned modernizing, and you may have seen that the governor signed the municipal modernization bill today, actually. So I just wanted to bring to your attention that part of that bill, which is quite lengthy, actually deleted the exemption for banking from Chapter 30B.
Oh, really? Okay.
So you had included in your last draft putting that out to bid. Now, under the state law, when these changes take effect, they will have to go out to bid. So
okay.
I would say you don't need that in the ordinance anymore.
Since that's already part of the
It's
state
going to
law.
be something that has
that's
to
good to
go
know.
out to bid.
good.
And just as another note too, another provision of this bill that was signed today is that the thresholds have now been raised from $35,000 to $50,000 for competitive building. So this, I guess I would just ask that the council takes some action, at least in that regard, because our ordinance is now so far out of whack with the state law.
Of course, absolutely.
It's-
Now, Kara, as I recall, one of the things that we did do is we didn't set these limits anymore. We married them to whatever the floating number is of the state.
Right.
So as these future revisions are made, we'll be able
Won't
to
have to.
incorporate those. Okay, great.
Right. No, I just want to make the point that our ordinance right now is $10,000.
Right,
And the state
right,
law
right,
is
right.
going to be 50, so it's.
Right. I agree.
And the whole point of this legislation, obviously, is to modernize.
Right.
In deference to the maker of the order, I know that you said you want to take it up again. I put it on the agenda in hopes that if there were revisions, we
Well,
could entertain them tonight, but I mean, I'll defer to the maker in that regard.
Yeah, only because several counselors that voted no, I think just had more questions, and they felt, hey, until I'm 100% sure, I'm going to vote no, just because I can always vote yes tomorrow. And so to a number of them, they're comfortable with it as is now. One more counselor said there was a couple more tweaks. He has not gotten that back to me today. So unfortunately, I'm unable to present that at this point. I also wanted to give opportunity if Counselors Lisa McGivern, whomever, had anything else that they wanted to if we could work something out, I'd be happy to, consider that. But
Counselor Lisi.
Thank you. I made some comments at the full council meeting about, I was just dissatisfied with the way that the pay-to-play provision worked out, and I'd rather see it more uniform and have the towing contract subject to 30B. I think we had an earlier draft that actually had the towing contract subject to 30B as opposed to pay-to-play. So I'd be more favorable towards the 30B status for public towing. And I think that some of the, campaign finance, rules that we wanted to implement make sense, but I think they belong under a separate ethics ordinance that would be more comprehensive and look more wholesale as opposed to singling out any particular type of vendor in the city.
Thank you.
Can I just respond to that?
1 second. Are you in, did you wish to be heard?
Sure.
Counselor McGivern?
Last time I said no, I misunderstood that question. Just quickly, I think Kevin is very upfront, and I do appreciate the chance to talk further on the issue. As I said at the meeting, it was a comprehensive all or nothing that was in front of us, and I gave the portions that forced me or compelled me to vote no on it, and that's the professional services, the language that deals with the purchaser, not so much the purchaser being a term limit, but the assistant purchaser being a term limit. I just didn't buy into that. Banking to me is not the services of banking, but I guess it's a moot point now, but the professional services that we get through banking in terms of what we do with bonds, what we do with a number of things that we do that have an impact on our actual bond rating. And we've been very fortunate to have a consultant, through the banking process that has been with us for close to 30 years. The other professional services is, and I know there's two ways to look at it, but the legal services, and I forget the third one that I brought to the attention. Towing I don't have a problem with. I agree with Kevin, and I agree with the committee that 30B should be mirrored. Our ordinance should be mirrored to whatever the state statute is. It only makes sense. 30B is a good tool. It's not a perfect tool. It makes the city do things backwards, which sometimes can be problematic. A good example was when we lost the case for the Roberts Field, or we didn't lose the case. It was actually lost before us, but we were forced to use a product that was not the full product of what we were looking for. And that would have been that extra membrane on the field that would have kept the pellets up there more intact in the field itself. So I just would look for, and either separate votes or look for, some more changes as to what I cited at the meeting and this evening. And I really believe the pay-to-play is very important topic for the city, but I think the campaign finance laws themselves are very strict, and I feel much more comfortable that it's the state looking at us, not us looking at ourselves.
Linda?
Thank you. Counselor Jordan?
Yeah, thanks. Couple of points. Just to touch on what Counselor Lisi said. The point of the pay-to-play rule is if you were to put towing under the competitive bidding, it cannot be therefore subject to the pay-to-play rule. That was what we learned in the whole midst of the conversation. That's why we didn't do that. So what you're asking to put it to the side and have it subject, that means towing contractors will not be subject to the pay-to-play rules. As we know, they made $24,000 in contributions in this last election cycle alone, at least that we know of, from the reports. And so to say we're not going to make carve that out to subject to the pay-to-play rules just totally undermines pay-to-play completely. It's the number one donor.
But I want to just make it really clear that I was not in favor of pay-to-play. That
Okay.
It's not that I'm, trying to say, let's do 30B and pay-to-play. It's like I'm not interested in pursuing the pay-to-play provision.
All right, so and there's nothing I can do to amend that. That's just a fundamental difference we have. Some people feel you can you can get contracts with the city, and you can make unlimited donation to the person giving you contracts, and that's just totally ethically fine. Some people think that that's okay. I happen to believe that that's not okay. And I would say most citizens of this city do not feel that's okay, especially once they get to know the breadth of the money. Now, to Councilor McGivern, who made a number of really good points, I wanted to first say with respect to the purchaser term limit, that was a direct word for word to what the current ordinance is. That was no change in this legislation. So I want to make you feel more comfortable about that. Whatever the current ordinance says, that's exactly what this ordinance says. So there was no change there. So that's number one. As far as the banking piece, that's already been taken care of us for the state. So if there's any other points, I'll maybe talk to you offline and we can go through those as we get to, the end of the rainbow here at some point. So more conversation, but those 2 points I wanted to point out. Okay, that's it.
So there haven't
Motion to
been
table?
any amendments been offered yet
Yeah,
to the
I'm thinking
language.
that we'll maybe, I'm gonna continue to have more conversations with counselors, and maybe for our next meeting, we can, put that all together, but I think this is good.
I just wanted to be sure that there wasn't any specific amendment anybody wanted to put before the committee.
Yeah, I think we can do it the next.
If I can answer that, it's not, I appreciate the offer, but to me, it's because it was all or nothing. My points aren't, I'm not asking for amendments. I will vote against the points
Okay.
that I'm against. If it is separated, where there are separate votes, there are things I can vote in favor of.
Okay.
But not a comprehensive package that came out with so much, inclusive of everything that, the committee worked on. And then
Okay.
only gave us one vote,
Okay.
up or down.
Okay, point made.
Sounds like a
just-
charter commission change, Kevin, I don't know.
I was just trying to clarify, because you had made specific comments about some of the staffing matters, which this committee didn't even discuss, so I didn't know if you wanted the committee to consider an amendment, but, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so motion to table.
All in favor?
Aye. All right, so,
Okay,
that takes
so,
care of those three.
I did get a communication from Ryan that he notified the people for the license applications, and he understood they were both attending, but I don't see the second person.
Well,
That remains tabled.
She'll have to come to our next meeting.
Just as a point of information, so we're on to item 10.
Take care, Mike.
Bye, Mike.
Motion to take up item 10 off the table?
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 10 was filed by Counselor McGee. Order that pursuant to the Public Safety Committee recommendation, June 21, 2016, the Ordinance Committee adopt an ordinance changing the DPW's policy-making procedures on the ability to limit Holyoke residents from use of the yard waste area due to the taxpayer's trailer size. The DPW's argument is that it is looking to stop contractors from using the yard illegally by imposing a blanket policy that impacts tax-paying residents instead of doing their due diligence to stop the illegal use. Now, I didn't have another specific communication from Counselor McGee. I am aware of this issue, though, because a couple of constituents in Ward 5 have also had the same complaint, because they happen, and I may be slightly in error as to what the numbers are, but I believe the limit is 10 feet
Yep.
at the DPW.
That's correct.
And many people have a trailer that is 11 feet long or 12 feet long. And it's just the trailer they've always had. They don't want to go buy a new one.
The problem you have is some people who are contractors and are working, who also happen to be a resident, will, because they're doing this professionally, they will say, not be totally candid with the DPW, let's just put it that way. And as a result, the DPW landed at this number. As to smaller trailers tend to shy away the professional contractors who also happen to hold a debris card. And I think that's where that number comes from. Because I guess more of residents tend to have smaller trailers. If you're just, I have a little trailer to bring my yard or, stuff around. But if I'm coming down with a 20-foot trailer, those tend to be owned by people who are actual contractors and such. But
Right. What I would like to ask the committee to consider is some slight modification that would
Yes.
address the issues of the people who have a 12-foot trailer, not a 20-foot trailer,
Right.
but it's 12 feet, and they can't use,
Well,
you know.
So what's the number gonna be? then?
Well, no, I think that instead of creating a blanket number, you could ask for some sort of exemption from the DPW, and you'd have to prove that you don't own or work for some sort of landscape or architecture, contracting firm.
But if you do, that doesn't prevent you as John Q. resident from actually having your own trailer and bringing your stuff down there.
As long as it's your stuff. You're
Well,
not
right,
supposed to be
right.
bringing
But
site
just
debris
because you work
down.
for a contractor doesn't mean you can't use the DPW.
That,
if you
no,
live
no,
here.
no, but that's not the issue. The DPW doesn't, as long as it's your stuff and it's under 10 feet, you're fine. If it's under 10 feet, they don't want you bringing other people's stuff and you're under 10
Well,
feet.
right, and I mean, the 10 feet was an arbitrary number set to avoid a problem that it may or may not be preventing, because somebody can still go down there with 50 10-foot trailer loads of stuff.
Well, you're only allowed so many
As
visits.
a practical matter,
You're only allowed so many
people
visits,
aren't going
7.
to do that, but I think if it's the difference of 11 feet or 12 feet. So, I mean, if we could just carve in an exemption to Counselor Lisi's point, if the person goes down and says, I know my trailer's 12 feet long, but I'm Joe Smith, I live on this street, I am not a contractor, blah, 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 let the guy dump his leaves or his grass or whatever. It's a frustration. People pay a lot of taxes and they're like, I have to go cut my trailer down to go down to DPW.
As
because
long
it's
as
2
you
feet
can
longer.
police the individuals who are the people who are home remodel people, who are running their own businesses typically, these are the people who you're gonna have a problem with.
Right, but
Of any feet, what the DPW wants to prohibit is people who are doing home remodeling and such, bringing that debris
it's work,
down and dumping it off.
right. Right.
That's what we have to prevent. Everything else, you're fine. So the question is, how do you word it to make sure that don't happen? Because that's what the DPW cares about.
So there's a limit of X trips per year, right?
7.
Is it possible to talk to the DPW or anyone from the
Well,
DPW
they
before we
came-
do
Well, they
this?
came into public safety.
They did?
And they
Alright.
said what Kevin has said.
And a half a truckload of construction debris is considered one trip. So just FYI on that, too. They have a whole big sign there. Half a truckload equals one trip. You bring a giant thing, 2 trips.
Oh,
Counselor McGivern?
I remember the conversation. Two things. One is, it's already, I think, tough on elderly residents who hire someone to remove yard waste and have to pay the full price to the contractor because there's no way to determine when the contractor gets down there if it's just the person from Hoyok's yard waste or if it's multiple people from perhaps other cities' yard waste itself. But I think tonight the order is only about yard waste, it's more the compost pile, or whatever we call it these days. Brush dump? I don't know.
it smells bad.
You mean leaves and things
Yeah.
like?
This is,
I'm pretty sure that's all Counselor McGee was referring
This
to
is
in
what
this
it
one.
says.
Yard waste.
We've had both conversations. They get confusing because
This-
it's the
Okay.
same card.
let me clarify.
Oh, well,
This order is asking us to look at changing the ordinance that changes the policy
Okay, I see.
around,
so they don't want landscaping. That must be the landscapers.
Because if you
Because
drive
you
down,
get 35 trips. See, now, the number is not 7 anymore. Yard waste is 35 trips. And what they're probably concerned about is landscapers
Yeah.
bringing down a big thing of grass clippings and stumps and all kinds of things.
And DPW does pick up yard waste curbside,
Correct. If you bag it,
Yeah.
they will.
so I don't really see the need for the carve out again.
Because a professional landscaping company is supposed to deal with their own business, right? Yeah.
right, but
professional landscaping's not gonna bag it. They're gonna bulk it and.
But that's what
Put
you're
it in
paying
the-
for. You know,
That's
I
what
have
the-
someone that comes and mows my lawn, right?
Yeah.
okay, whoa. So, the order is, they're looking to change DPW's policy, making the procedures on the ability to limit Hoyok residents from the use of the yard waste area due to the taxpayer's trailer size. So, it appears that Counselor McGee is either looking for us to have them change the way they are implementing the policy. I don't know. I think we have an ordinance, though, that says 10 feet.
Yeah.
And that is what, it's just a policy? Oh, okay, thank
Our
you for that
ordinance says they can
clarification.
adopt a policy.
Okay, so I would appreciate a motion from, or actually, I'll make the motion that a resident can show up at the DPW with their yard waste with a trailer of up to 12 feet. And if they stipulate it is their own yard waste and they are not acting as a contractor, that the DPW may consider and allow a resident with a trailer of up to 12 feet to dump their yard waste there. Because, I mean, this is the issue that people have come to us from, there's like 2 or 3 different people, and it's just, it's being so strict with the policy as to be punitive to somebody who happened to show up with the wrong size trailer. I mean, that's how it seems.
But it seems like our ordinance just says the DPW can create a policy. So I think we have to say, our ordinance says the DPW is going to stipulate a policy, but we should also allow for exemptions. I mean, that's,
We're being asked by the maker of the order, not that we have to do that, but we're being asked to establish an ordinance that changes their policy, because apparently I would simply like to ask them to change their policy,
Well,
personally.
the ordinance is generic in that it says set a policy, but we have done only, to my knowledge, one carve-out, which is the, on renters. We did spell that out, because their policy did not allow renters to bring
Right.
stuff and get a card. So we did carve that out now in the ordinance. You could do a carve-out on this.
for homeowners for homeowners that have trailers larger than what the DPW's policy permits, because that could change, right?
Yep.
They can obtain an exemption, given that they are able to prove that they don't.
They're not a landscaper or something. Yeah.
They're not a landscaping company themselves or employed by a landscaping company.
Is that a motion?
Motion
Do I
for
have a
the
second?
exemption.
Subject to, yeah, I think, you want to have it come back, the final language, but maybe we could have the DPW review it too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, copy to the DPW or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, if they're okay with it, I mean, that sounds okay to me.
Yeah,
you know.
and a representative of DPW was invited, but, Ms. Reardon is on vacation,
I see.
so that sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah.
So was that a second, did I hear,
Yes,
Counselor
yep,
Lopez? So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So my shorthand is that we amend it, that asking DPW to create an exemption if the trailer is larger and the owner is not a landscaper. Okay, on to item 11.
Makes motion to take 11 off the table?
Second?
All in favor?
Excellent.
Item 11, filed by Counselor Jordan, Chapter 54 of the Hoyoke Code of Ordinances be amended to make it unlawful to use a drone to fly over the private property of another without their prior written consent. They shall also be prohibited from flying over any municipal property without the prior written consent of the city. A violation shall be subject to a fine. A drone shall be defined as any unmanned aerial system. And as we all know, we've been through a couple renditions.
Kara, I think had a couple,
We sent it
did you have
back out at the last meeting, I think.
some tweaks? Because I know you talked to the MAA and, yeah, we were gonna make a
Hobbyists
distinction between hobbyists and
versus
commercial
commercial.
people. Thank you. There you go.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
There's a few more.
Thanks, Kara.
Keep them.
I like this. I think this came out good, Kara. So,
And you know, it's interesting, I work with somebody who lives in Chicopee, and she says every single day at around 5 o'clock, somebody who she has not figured out who it is yet is flying a drone over her backyard and her pool. She says it's highly annoying and invasive. You know, I mean, people do these things.
I make a motion to be adopted as amended by Kara Cunha.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I just have one
Oh, go
really
ahead.
quick question, sorry.
Sorry.
So, section 4C2. Sorry, you got it? So that means that basically the city of Holyoke is regulating all the airspace below 400 feet.
Or we're considering it private.
Well, for hobbyists and recreational. Business and commercial is under the federal regulation.
Right, but
Yeah, but that's the only thing that we're creating jurisdiction over, because the
all we can.
FAA.
Yep.
Yep.
The FAA has already got the commercial people.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure I understood how that was being read.
And that was, again, having spoke to Jesus and Jeff, those were the two who, as best of an expert on being commercial drone people, that's the language they wanted, so that's what I.
And just in summary, the essence of our language is that for the commercial, we're saying we follow the regs. Otherwise,
FAA regs,
that they
yeah.
have set.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
All in favor?
All right,
Sorry for rushing the question. Diosdado, were you a yes on the drone? Thank you. Thank you all. That's a good thing we can bring to the council.
yeah, that was a good one.
All right.
Motion to take up item number 12.
Second,
All in favor? Aye. Item 12, filed by Counselor Leahy. The city ordinance establishing the committee called the Biking and Pedestrian Committee shall be amended in the following way. The paragraph describing committee composition beginning with "the committee shall be comprised of" shall be struck out and replaced with "the committee shall be comprised of no fewer than 7 member positions, no fewer than 5 of the 7 of which are reserved for community members of Holyoke. The remainder may be filled by local elected officials or municipal staff serving in their official capacity. Members shall be appointed by the mayor and shall serve 3-year terms. The committee shall elect a chair from the committee membership at the first meeting of each calendar year to serve a 1-year term. At the discretion of the mayor, committee membership may be expanded or reduced, not to be reduced to fewer than 7 positions, with the consent of the committee chair. A quorum will be established as a simple majority of serving members, not including any vacant positions. I have not had any communication from the maker of the order. Has any other member of the committee or any counselor in chambers? Okay, Attorney Cunha.
Really quickly, the first thing I wanted to point out was we actually don't have an ordinance creating the committee. It was just done through adoption of an order. So we do have the complete streets ordinance that this kind of falls under, and Councilor Lisi might know better, but there's not an ordinance that creates the biking and pedestrian committee. It was just done by the council adopting an order back in November of 2013.
Okay.
And just
That was
briefly,
the
change.
master plan. By adopting the bike and pedestrian master plan, we created this committee.
It may have been. I mean, there was a
But it's not
separate.
an ordinance.
There was a separate order that a committee be formed called the Biking and Pedestrian Committee, and that was adopted. But I think the changes are coming from, I know Debbie in the Planning and Economic Development. I mean, the committee as it is currently set up sets out 14 members, which is a huge amount. It's an even number. And so I think they had an issue where there was only like 5 people that came to the meeting, and
Never have a
I
quorum.
suggested they might want to look at, you don't usually have an even number, and it seems like a very large group. So that's kind of where this is coming from, and I don't know how you want to do that as far as procedurally.
So if,
why don't we make
if
it an ordinance and? go
Yeah, we
through
can
all
just
this?
make it an ordinance if
Yeah.
that's.
we could create the ordinance rather than amending it. Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. I was serving on this committee for a while, and the way that it was worded was, it was very explicit because it had the 14 members, so many had to be city councilors, so many people had to be youth, so many people had to be, it was very complex. And then it was very confusing once people started dropping off and not attending meetings, how to actually solicit new members because they were
In the
so.
right category.
Yes. So I think that this is going to be really helpful to, A, get a quorum so that body is useful and moving forward on activities. And then B, in the case of, shifting membership from, community members that, perhaps a more formal appointment process could help to increase attendance. And also, if there is a vacancy, make it easier to fill vacancies when they do pop up.
Can I make a suggestion that we make this even more simple? Thank you. That we, not this fewer of, greater than, expand at his discretion down the road.
Is,
7, appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the city council, because that's kind of the kind of guy I am. And I just think all these appointments about any of the committees should be confirmed by us. And 3-year term, whatever, that's fine,
Staff, yeah.
I wouldn't even get into all that. I'll let the mayor he can pick whoever he wants,
be two.
and if he wants,
But just out of curiosity, because it is a planning body, essentially, it's working alongside of,
planning board?
well, not planning board, but economic development, planning and economic development. I wonder if we should carve out something similar to the way that Jeff is part of the planning board.
Like ex officio as one of the 7?
Somebody
Yeah.
from the planning department is part of this.
But we would leave that up to the mayor, wouldn't we? I mean, we don't want to micromanage it.
No, that would be too many people.
This is not that,
You know, they
Yeah.
meet how often? I mean, it's not like a planning board.
I'm always for more mayoral power anyways, right? So, we'll just let the mayor, pick.
Well, I mean, we
We'll
can
let
go
the
two
mayor
ways.
pick
We can create an ordinance, or we could just make it advisory back to the committee, because
They,
How about I'm gonna stick with my recommendation, 7 members, by ordinance, appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council.
second, and also to receive some training, open meeting law and all that stuff. Make
Oh,
sure that they
yes,
comply.
that should be all the commissions.
yeah, right. Okay, so, all in favor of that ordinance creation?
Aye. Yep.
Okay,
So,
wow, we're
Kara,
just,
you'll be able to put that in legal form? You don't need,
3-year
Yeah.
term.
all right. I think our work here is
done.
done for the
Yes.
night.
Motion-
I do
oh.
want to address one question I received from membership relative to the solar pilots and appearing on the agenda. I've reviewed the jacket, I've reviewed the actions of the committee. We addressed the orders timely, we acted on them timely, we made a recommendation to the city council. City council sent it back to committee, and I find that the committee has addressed those appropriately, and we won't be taking them up further.
Did you take any action on 5 and 6?
5 we
On
passed
item
and 6
5,
we
we
tabled
passed,
because it
6 we
didn't show.
tabled.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.